everybody. Welcome to the Clovis Hills podcast, the message summary podcast.
Yeah.
Dr. Sean Beatty.
Dr. Beatty.
Gave a great message yesterday. And hopefully if you didn't get a chance to watch it and then watch this podcast. So go back and watch the message, then join us on this podcast. There you go. Yeah. Hey, great message yesterday. Acts 18.
Yeah, now
tough,
right? I know how hard it is. Sorry. Sorry, I gave you the first part.
That's right. But still, Paul's on all his missionaries' journeys. He's getting kicked out of everywhere. But I thought you took a great approach to it, talking about God's will.
Yeah, because he has that. There's a statement in Acts 18:20 where he tells these Jews that he's sharing Jesus with, he says, I will come back if it's God's will. And it made me think of all the places in the New Testament where the apostles and Paul himself would always refer to God's will.
Yeah, he starts a lot of his letters that way.
Yeah, and how God's will works and how Paul made decisions autonomously, but he believed God's will was involved in his decision-making, even if it was a bad decision.
Yeah, and how in our culture, our time here in America, the church in America, we kind of use God's will almost flippantly sometimes, and as this big battle, like, you know, have you ever done the whole thing like, I don't know God's will, but if this song's playing when I turn on the radio, then I'm doing it, you know, kind of a thing, and it's mysterious.
Yeah, and in some ways, though, if you go back to like Bible times, like they cast lots.
They cast lots
to figure out. That's like flipping a coin. That's the equivalent of flipping a coin in our culture.
Yeah,
and it's this belief that God is at work in all of it, somehow, while we're making autonomous free will decisions.
Yeah. So you said something interesting. I want you to elaborate on this. You said God's will is 100% God and 100% us.
Yeah. So it's not like there's a give and take between my will and God's will. Mm-hmm. God's will, he's 100% going to get done what he's going to done. He's making all the shots. He's not just going, okay, Sean, I'm going to do this. Now, what are you going to do? Kind of thing.
Right.
He already knows how it all works out. He stands outside of space and time. But at the same time, we are all 100% autonomous people that make decisions for ourselves.
Right.
Right? Because if it's just God has mapped it out and we're just living it out.
Yeah.
Then it's determinism or fatalism.
Fatalism,
right?
yeah.
And you know, you might as well not even try. You just.
And then faith and obedience is kind of a mute point at that.
Yeah,
you know?
And there are some weird sects of Christianity that kind of like they don't do evangelism because they believe that, well, God's just going to bring the elect to him, and you know, like, so we don't really need to try hard at it.
Yeah, God will just bring them to us.
We'll just do church and we'll preach the gospel at church, and hopefully people, you know, God will bring who needs to come.
Yeah.
Right? And that is not at all how the apostle, like, if that were the case, then Paul would not have left and been the God.
They would not have been
Gentile.
going into Jerusalem getting persecuted every day. You know what I mean?
As a matter of fact, I was reading this morning in Acts 21 and 22. So Paul comes back to Israel from his journeys, and he goes to this guy, Philip the evangelist's house.
Yeah.
Philip has 6 daughters who are all prophets, by the way. So if you want to talk about women preachers.
Oh, that's for another podcast.
Okay. And then another prophet, a male prophet, comes to him. I forget his name, Agabus. And he ties Paul's hands and feet with Paul's belt and prophesies and says, basically, you're going to be bound and arrested if you go to Jerusalem.
Wow.
And Paul goes right back into God's will again. He goes, I trust God's will.
Yeah.
What he's saying is, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm not scared because I know that God's will is what is best for my life. And if they arrest me and I'm killed, that was God's will, and that's going to be what's best for my life.
Right.
Or if I go and more people come to Christ, that was God's will. And I'm good either way because I am trusting God's will.
You know what? That's interesting. I know we're out of time here, but you just brought up an interesting point. A lot of times people will say, like, going back to the Paul situation, I'm just going to say this. I'm going to go out on a limb. But sharing the gospel with people is probably always God's will.
It's God's will. Thank you.
Like, you know, should I share the gospel? No, you should do it because he said, go make disciples.
Should I love someone?
Yeah,
yes,
should I
that's
love
God's
someone?
will.
Exactly.
Should I worship God this weekend? Yes, that's God's will for you.
Exactly.
Obedience to God is God's will.
He's not
That's
gonna be
really
mad at
what's
you.
going on. So Paul said, I'm going to Jerusalem no matter what happens because that's God's will.
Exactly.
There
He's
you
not
go.
going to be mad at you if you share the gospel with someone. Stop loving people. God's not going to say that.
So there you go.
There you
want to
go.
know God's will for your life? Like, obey him. Be a better Christian. Follow him. Let him grow your character. Sacrifice more. Love more. Do those things. That's always God's will for your life over what your job is, where you live, what kind of car you're going to buy, all those things. If you are delighting yourself in the Lord, he will give you the desires of your heart, which will be his heart.
Amen. Amen, preacher.
There you go.
All right. Hey, thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you next week.